All right, good afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting of the CalChoice Board of Directors to order. Roll call, please.
Town of Apple Valley.
Present.
City of Lancaster.
Present.
City of Palmdale. City of San Jacinto. City of Pico Rivera.
Present.
City of Pomona.
Chris Diggs, present.
City of Rancho Mirage. City of Santa Barbara.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right, will you please rise for the flag salute? Janelle, would you mind leading us in the flag? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just like to ask, are there any board comments or announcements that need to be made prior to the start of the normal agenda? No, hearing none. Board Secretary, can you please provide the public comment announcement and see if we have any public comment?
Certainly, members of the public can address the board on items on the agenda at the time the item is being heard or during public comment for topics that are not listed on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. In conformance with the Brown Act, no board action can occur on items presented during public comment. If you desire to speak during public comment and are in person, please fill out a speaker card and submit it to the CalChoice staff. If you are participating in a remote location, please identify yourself with a CalChoice representative. When you are called to speak, please come forward to the podium and state your name. To address the board regarding an item on the agenda, please fill out a speaker card and submit it to the board secretary before the board chair announces the item. Thank you.
Are there any public comments?
We have no requests to speak.
Okay, hearing none, we'll move forward. Well, are there any questions from the board on the consent calendar? Is there any member of the public wishing to speak on the consent calendar items?
We have no requests to speak.
Okay. Are there any public comments from the remote locations?
None for Pomona.
None from Santa Barbara.
None for Pico Rivera.
I'd like to entertain a motion and a second for the approval of the consent calendar.
I'll move to approve consent items 1 through 4.
Second.
The board secretary, can you call for the vote?
Town of Apple Valley.
Yes.
City of Lancaster.
Yes.
City of Palmdale.
Yes.
City of San Jacinto.
Yes.
City of Pico Rivera.
Yes.
City of Pomona.
Yes.
City of Rancho Mirage. City of Santa Barbara.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Moving on to new business. Item number 5, update on SCE 2025 era proceeding. It looks like speaking on this remotely is Kevin Tononian or Tonian? Tononian? I've never said his last name. I just call him Kevin.
You got it.
So Kevin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Harris, members of the board, it is my pleasure to introduce Tim Lindell, who is a partner with Keys and Fox. Tim represents CalChoice and its members in all matters of general rate setting. He brings a wealth of knowledge in developing, advancing, and defending regulatory processes and policies. And as a side note, Tim is a classic overachiever. He first stepped into a CPUC hearing room a mere 3 days after passing the California bar. Tim is here to provide us with an update on SCE's ERA case. And with that, I will turn it over to Tim.
Thanks very much, Kevin, and thank you all for the opportunity to present to you today. I have some slides I'm going to share, so I'll bring those up and appreciate a confirmation that you can see the slides and hear me okay.
Yes, we can see your slides.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So like Kevin said, my name is Tim Lindell. I'm a partner at the law firm Keys and Fox. I've been practicing before the Public Utilities Commission for 15 years. For about half of that, about 7 years, I've been working on these Energy Resource Recovery Account or ERA cases. These are annual proceedings. A lot happens every single year in these proceedings, but for our intents and purposes today, the key thing that happens is this is where your power charge indifference adjustment or PCIA rates are set. It's also the case in which Southern California Edison's bundled customer generation rates are set. So before I give you an update on what's going on in those cases, it's always a good idea when talking about PCI rates to just set the stage a little bit so that when I bring up issues that are of concern in those cases, you all kind of have a sense of what I'm talking about. So at a very basic level, PCI rates are set using the green circle on the right. That is the PCI revenue requirement. It is calculated in dollars, and then you divide that PCI revenue requirement by a load forecast for 2025, which is in kilowatt hours. And in that way, you get your dollar per kilowatt hour power charge indifference adjustment rate that you would see on your customers' bills. There's two ingredients that go into the PCIA revenue requirement. One is forward-looking. That's the forecasted indifference amount. So that takes a look at the forecasted costs and anticipated revenues that Southern California Edison will see in 2025. And the second is backwards looking. That's the year-end PABA balance, and PABA stands for Portfolio Allocation Balancing Account. What the year-end PABA balance does is it takes last year's forecast and then resolves it, trues it up with the actual costs and revenues that Southern California Edison is seeing over the year. So the forecasted indifference amount takes a look at 2025, and the year-end PABA balance is truing up 2024 as the year goes on. Those two balances are put together and they form the PCIA revenue requirement. There's a lot on this slide, I know, and I'm happy to take questions on it or maybe come back for a PCIA 101 at some point. But there's two pieces of this calculation, the equations that are on this slide that are important for this year's case. The first is the market value of the utilities portfolio. It is compared to the total cost of that portfolio in terms of, in order to come up with that forecasted indifference amount that we looked at. The second one is this thing down here called the RA adder. That is the capacity adder. And it is one of three important ingredients that goes into determining what the value of Edison's generation portfolio is. It's easy to determine the market value of something that is bought and sold in the market for delivery in 2025. That's simply the price that you paid or the price that you sold for that commodity. It's more difficult to determine the market value of something that was not bought or sold for 2025. So if Edison is using utility-owned generation or an older contract in order to satisfy its renewable portfolio standard or capacity needs, what the commission does then is it creates a benchmark to value those assets that are not bought and sold each year. Those benchmarks are based on transactions for similar commodities. So the RA benchmark, the RA adder, is based on other RA transactions in the market, and same with the RPS adder. So there are three benchmarks that we look at in this case. The first is the energy index. That's the price of power without any RPS or any GHG-free attribute. It's also called brown power. The second one is the RPS adder. That's the value of a renewable energy credit or a REC, so the renewable component of energy that's delivered. And then the last one is the RA adder, and that's the value of capacity. And that's the one we're going to focus on for this case. So all else being equal, if the RA adder goes up, the market value of the portfolio goes up. If the market value of the portfolio goes up, your PCIA rates will go down. Okay. So what happened this year? For most intents and purposes, this year's been a typical year. The case is filed on May 15th. We have testimony, we have hearings, we have briefing, and then we get to October 1st. And October 1st, Energy Division at the Public Utilities Commission calculates and publishes updated benchmarks for the year. And this year was unusual. So the benchmarks, as we just saw, are a key part of how these rates are calculated. But on October 2nd, we only got one benchmark. We got the RPS benchmark. And then on October 4th, we got the RA adder 2 days late. And then on October 6th, the commission revised the RPS benchmark to be different than it was. The RA benchmark, the RA adder this year, especially forecasted for 2025, was very high. In fact, it increased so much that the commission worried something was wrong with the benchmarks, and it asked for comments on whether there should be additional procedural mitigation measures to stop the PCIA framework from working as intended. We replied to that ruling from the judge that such mitigation measures were unnecessary. Rates are not overly volatile this year. In fact, rates for Edison's bundled generation customers have been coming down throughout the course of the year. And the market is the market. As I know you all are aware, the cost of RA capacity is very high in California right now, and the cost of renewable energy credits is very high. And with both of those elements being high, that means the market value of Edison's portfolio is high, which means PCI rates should be coming down. Nonetheless, the judge allowed Southern California Edison to file 2 separate October updates, one that includes a mitigation measure and one that does not include a mitigation measure. The one with the mitigation measure was called the alternate October update. And we filed comments and briefs in response to that alternate October update, saying that the alternate should not be considered. 1, because it was not a procedural mechanism, and 2, because it changed the value of Southern California Edison's portfolio by $2 billion. All of that is to say, this is where we ended up with regard to the alternate October update. And you can kind of think of this as your worst case scenario in terms of where PCI rates are going to end up in 2025. So on the left side here, you have the LSE, that stands for load serving entity. And you have below that the bundled generation rate. So that's Southern California Edison's system average bundled generation rate. And then below that is each individual CCA in their vintage. So we have Lancaster in the 2014 vintage, Apple Valley's 2016, Pico Rivera is 2017, San Jacinto is also 2017, along with Rancho Mirage, Pomona's 2020, Santa Barbara's 2021, and Palmdale's 2022. Your current PCI rates are these numbers right here. PCI rates for you all are negative right now, which means that the value of Edison's portfolio is greater than its costs. The bundled generation rate is 10.5 cents up here. And then when the October update was filed, these are the new PCI rates that are included there. And then here is the cost increase or decrease that you see. And then this is the final PCI rate that you would see in place starting on January 1st, 2025. I said earlier, this is kind of your worst case scenario. That's if Edison's alternate October update is the one that's adopted. If the original October update is the one that's adopted, you would see PCI rates in this center column and over here on the right that are 2 to 4 times lower than those presented here. That's how big of a shift that $2 billion shift in revenue requirements is. So An important thing to keep in mind here is these rates are not final. They're going to change twice more before we get to actual rates that are in place on January 1st, 2025. Part of the reason for that is that Energy Division again updated the RA adder that's used to set PCIA rates. And when they did that, the adders went down, which means PCIA rates go up and bundled customer rates go down. In addition, if you recall, Edison is updating their PABA as we go over the course of the year. So on Friday, we got what's called an advice letter filing. And what that did is it included those new benchmarks that we saw on November 5th. And it also included trued up values for September and October of this year. So that advice letter is the first change that we'll see between now and the end of the year. And then the second change that we will see is the one that actually decides whether the alternate October update or a different one is, or the original October update is adopted. So we'll know that when the commission makes a decision closing this case on either December 4th or on December 19th. It's still to be determined at which commission meeting this case will be considered. The very last thing I'd like to point out is if we do get a decision on December 4th, we should get a January 1st rate change. If the decision is delayed until December 19th, then Edison has told us that they are unlikely to be able to change rates on January 1st. And then the rate changes resulting from this case would be pushed until March 1st of 2025. So there's still a lot still to be decided in terms of where these rates end up. So a lot to digest there. It's pretty complicated. Please let me know if there's any questions I can answer.
All right. Are there any questions from members of the board?
No, thank you.
Any questions from the public?
We have no requests to speak.
All right, so with that, the actions for the board to simply receive the report. And that concludes unless there are any other questions that anybody can think of before we move forward. Okay, hearing none. Thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Moving on to new business item number 6, state legislative session. Call again, Mr. Kevin Tonian. So butchering his last name. I'm sorry, Kevin.
Oh, no worries. Chair Harris, members of the board, it is my pleasure to introduce Andrea DeVoe, who is the managing partner with the DeVoe Burr Group. She and her capable team represent CalChoice members and our legislative interest in areas including energy policy. And she is here today to provide the board with a recap of the 2024 legislative session. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Andrea.
Thank you, Kevin, and good afternoon, everyone. Do you have the slide deck, Kevin, available to share?
I do.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and start talking through it in the interest of time. So thanks again for having me. Very excited to be reporting an abbreviated, I guess, portion of the overall legislative landscape from this past session and a little bit of what is to come in this next legislative calendar year. So looking at the 2024 legislative results, we had nearly, and Kevin, you can go ahead and advance it. We had just about 2,159 bills introduced in 2024. So of those bills, 55.8% were reached the governor's desk, and he vetoed only 15, well, almost 16, nearly 16% of those bills. So we had a really interesting signing rate this year, even with a budget deficit and, you know, all the other reasons that that vetoes occur. So I'll get into some of the bills of significant interest for, of course, for CalChoice and the member companies here, but member organizations. But I do think it's important that we note just how extensive and exhaustive the bill packages have been, and we anticipate the same to be true heading into the next calendar year, with the legislative session starting on December 2nd and kicking off again on January 6th for a full 2-year session. I will note that this past election resulted in 31 new members of the legislature. So of 120 member body legislature, 80 assembly, and 40 Senate, that's pretty significant. So lots of new friends that CalChoice will be making, some of whom represent your regions as well. Moving into a little bit of the legislation that's more germane to CalChoice and the work that we're doing here. Most of the energy related bills really are focused on, interestingly enough, resource adequacy, which I know everybody's intimately familiar with. 2 bills that I want to point out here: AB 1921 by Assemblymember Pappen. In essence, what this bill does is it expands the definition of renewable electric generation facility. So in other words, qualifying resources for RPS to include fuel cells and linear generators. So obviously, depending on price and availability, that could expand opportunities for more flexibility in sourcing renewable energy. Thought that one was worth noting. And then also AB 2368, which I know I've been talking with Kevin and Kathy and Barbara and many of you about. This bill it's interesting. It was actually brought to the chairwoman, Assemblymember Petrie Norris, by Microsoft. And in essence, what this bill does is probably more important to note what it does not do, but it looks at the reliability modeling as part of the IRP, or the integrated resource our integrated planning process, and to include and assess short-term, midterm, and long-term reliability. And those are defined by years. I can answer questions there. But in essence, it really is looking at more of an assessment than inserting requirements. So it is not the intent of the legislature to further penalize LSEs. It's not their intent to prescribe a midterm reliability program, but more look and assess to see what reliability needs might come down the pipe as it relates to these defined short, midterm, and long-term assessments. So we will see what comes out of that. It will all be noted in public information. They're not trying to change the PUC's authority nor the ISO's, but trying to get, I think, a little bit more transparent as to how procurement is happening. So those are the other 3 bills that I note here. The last 3 bullets really are dealing more with studying, reporting, and tracking versus mandates or changes to requirements as it relates to procurement. So next slide is focused on the climate related policies. I won't get into any of these in detail. Happy to answer questions. I will note Senate Bill 1420 was the big hydrogen bill that was signed, hopefully encouraging CCAs and LSEs alike in presenting opportunities to include hydro as a clean energy resource into portfolios. A lot more to come as these bills get implemented, but all worth noting. Next slide, please. Prop 4. So this is one of the measures that did pass, actually with about 14%. It passed with about, I think, 54% with in favor, with 40% no. So it did pass with flying colors. The California voters said yes to climate bond. This is going to be important, I think, there for us, CalChoice, and you all, as it relates to opportunities for funding. So clearly, the election is just, well, I guess as of Tuesday, 2 weeks behind us, as they start to implement some of these projects, and we're looking at how the funding is being allocated. We'll be working with the team to make sure that everybody's fully aware. Next slide, please. So AI, so this has been something that is a growing interest, I think, to CalChoice and the member organizations. AI is, there's a lot of verticals as you're looking at the policies being developed. You're looking at consumer protections, you're looking at automated decision tools, regulating, open source, and all of these other, sort of complicated policy programs. One thing that I think is worth pointing out for our purposes here is the utilization of AI and the computing power that's associated with this. And this gets to data centers, which again gets to reliability. So this is something we're keeping a really close eye on, as is the legislature. I do anticipate, while there was actually only one data center bill, which was not really AI related, it was more on backup generating capacity. This past session, I do anticipate at least a handful, if not more, bills that are focused on data centers and capacity. So we are again keeping a close eye on those and engaged as necessary. And then, of course, just AI policy in general. There was about 60 bills introduced this last session. We anticipate the same. Everybody wants to get in the game here on AI policies. So we'll keep everybody apprised and make sure that even if it's not just energy consumption related issues or reliability, that everybody's aware as these policies are developing. And next slide, please. I think just as we're looking at this, the state budget, and I've reported this, so I don't want to focus too much on this past past year, but there was a pretty significant shortfall and deficit coming off of a couple of years of surplus. And we anticipate that while the deficit may not be as extensive as it was this past legislative session or budget cycle, we do anticipate the next couple of years to also include shortfalls. So what that means is potential funding cuts, not as exhaustive funding, and of course, protecting and defending funding that is already currently allocated. So we, in terms of the budget, they're finalizing the proposed budget now, which we will see on or around January 13th to 15th. And then we, roll up our sleeves and get to work and make sure we don't have to defend anything. And of course, looking for opportunities for additional funding, which kind of brings us back to the Prop 4 climate bond too, because this will all be dealt with in the budget as is proposed in January and worked on throughout the beginning of 2025. And that gets to the next session. So as I mentioned, on December 2nd, the 120 members come back to Sacramento. They get sworn in. That day, they come with their families. Typically, then they leave. And however, what's happening this year is the governor has called a special session to defend democracy. And we don't actually know what that special session will entail. So it's a little bit, folks are looking for potential opportunities or reasons to be concerned. My intel tells me that this is going to be a pretty narrowed special session and focused on probably funding for the Attorney General. None of that has been made public yet. And so what we're trying to figure out is, what exactly does the governor and the administration and therefore the legislative body plan to deal with in the special session when they come back on December 2nd. Also important to note that they being the legislators, introduce bills that day. So we'll be keeping a close eye on any other bills unrelated to the special session that could be of impact. They then come back on January 6th when session will recommence, and then it's off and running through the entire year for the next legislative session. We have a number of lobby days planned for CalChoice. We had some very successful lobby days and engagement this past year, and we look forward to that continuing. That was fast and furious in the interest of time and my agenda item, but I am, of course, happy to answer any questions.
I actually do have one question and maybe some a focus for next year as far as legislative requests on our behalf, as well as all the other CCAs, to really start looking at what can be considered as legislative change to provide us with help with our delinquencies, similar to that of a public utility. We are not technically treated as a public utility. We're as a aggregator. We're not awarded the tools that they are awarded for delinquency collection through the use of property tax liens or whatever the case may be. And I just recently, in the last decade or so, storm drain has been a public service that's been added to the list of public services that can be collected through those means through legislative change. And so something that we can probably consider working with yourself and the other CCAs to try to get somebody to sponsor that change and on our behalf and move that forward. So more of a next session thing, but something we do want to consider as we are all suffering from large delinquencies through the COVID period, through the COVID era. So
Absolutely. Yeah, that's, I think any one of our legislators, Assemblymember Juan Carrillo or Assemblymember Corey Jackson, would be very interested in carrying something like that. So we'll go offline and actually start to draft language. So I'm glad you brought that up. And it's timely given even where the state is in terms of their own budget. So yeah.
Yeah, well, one thing, Steve Carmona, City of Pico Rivera, just kind of curious of any other new legislation that we are considering to put out there. In addition, the climate bond, something we did here in the city is that we were able to successfully insert language that indirectly benefits the city of Pico Rivera. So moving forward, we should take a look at those opportunities where it could benefit CCAs whenever any future type of bond measures come out there. So I could point that language out to you at a later time, but just keep that in mind. And also our Senator Bob Archuleta is our former representative here in the city of Pico Rivera. So he can be a good advocate wherever we need him. Just let us know.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you. And as we're looking at potential opportunities, delinquency being one, we'll make sure that obviously everybody is fully read in on any potential bills that we'll be pushing. And certainly, looking as bills are introduced, what bills might impact us positively or of course negatively, and be advocating appropriately there. And on Prop 1, yeah, I would love to see the language to have that pointed out. 40% of the funds will benefit lower income communities. And again, as I mentioned, as they're rolling this out and implementing, it is going to be very important that we have a seat at that table, and we will. Appreciate your comments.
all right, so if there are no other questions from the dais, anything from the online folks? No? Here none, we'll move on. The board action, there was somebody to receive the report, and thank you again for the report, Andrea. All right, new business item number 7, consider approval of confirmation between CalChoice and NRG Business Marketing. I'd like to call Ms. Kathy DeFalco to present this item.
Good afternoon, Chairman and board members. For your consideration this afternoon is approval of a confirmation between CalChoice and NRG, scheduling coordination services, as well as congestion revenue right management services. Also, to authorize the executive director to, under the direction of the board member for each of the CCAs, to change the elections for payment terms within the contract and to sign any documents related to this item. There is no fiscal impact to CalChoice as a result of entering into this agreement. The revenues that pay for this, or the fees are paid by the revenues that are collected from the cities that pay for the services under this agreement. So in 2017, CalChoice contracted with NRG for a variety of things. One of them was the schedule coordination and CRR management services. We've been working with NRG since that point in time. The current agreement is at 55 cents per megawatt hour. However, under the new agreement, there will be a couple of options. I'll go over those in a minute. Schedule coordination services are those services that are basically with CAISO. It's the short and the long-term forecasting. It's the settlement of the energy that passes through the CAISO, any of the state reporting based on those activities. So NRG is responsible for all of those services under this contract. In addition, the congestion revenue rights management, those are rights that are allocated to each load serving entity. And NRG has been for, since each of the CCAs within CalChoice have been operating, has been managing those CRRs to the financial benefit of each of those CCAs. In terms of the cost, there is a table in the staff report that shows you the cost structure As I mentioned earlier, the current cost per megawatt hour is 55 cents per megawatt hour. That is for a net 55 payment term. We've been operating under those payment terms since each of the CCAs within CalChoice launched. As you have heard throughout this board meeting, the cost of RPS, RA, and all of those costs have gone up, as well as interest rates, as you all know. So as CalChoice and the team has looked to reduce costs for the CCAs, we have been working with NRG to see what we could do to bring down some of those costs. So we are looking at 3 different options under this contract. You have the opportunity to stay at the net 55, which does have some benefits to it. You can also go to a net 25, and then you can pay weekly. The CAISO invoices right now, they come in weekly, and NRG pays those and carries those on the CCA's behalf for up to the length of the payment term. So those are the conditions of the contract under which you're being asked to consider this afternoon. I also want to add that we have Brian Goldstein here. I think everybody knows Brian Goldstein from when he was with Pacific Energy Advisors, and he has a long history with CalChoice. And Brian, you want to come up and have anything you'd like to say?
Thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon. No, I think Kathy summed it up. I just think, for us, this is a very important relationship we have here with CalChoice and all the CCAs. As Kathy mentioned, it goes back to 10 years ago, I think, when we were exploring the launch of Lancaster as the first one in Essence territory. So the relationship is very deep. Personally, for me, being on the other side and implementing the programs and being here to see them mature and develop, we're personally invested as well as our company, right? Speaking on behalf of Jay Robertson, most of you know him, the head of our group here, who's had a 10-year relationship as well as Direct's been from the beginning, and now NRG. Back in 2014, 2015. So we're very excited to continue this relationship. I think the new kind of aspect of this contract that Kathy just references, we realize that there's not one size fits all, right, across 8 different CCAs now. So what we really wanted to offer here is, are there different kind of payment terms that benefit each or fit each CCA's needs differently? And so those that are more mature now, needing that extended extra month, if that's no longer necessary, then, we're happy, right, to not have a charge or anything for the working capital, right, that we've got to float for those invoices. So we've kind of approached this go around as a menu of 3 different options based on what makes most sense for each of all your cities and your needs and your financial situation. So thank you very much. We look forward to the next 5 years and hopefully a lot more after that, and happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions? All right. Any questions online? Are there any questions from the public? I'm sorry, whether they're here or online. I just have to ask.
We have no requests to speak.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So at this moment, I'd entertain a motion and a second for the items for approval.
I'll make the motion.
All right.
City of Santa Barbara, second.
San Jacinto motion, second from Santa Barbara. Call for the vote. All those in approval? Aye. Or I'm sorry, we're gonna.
Because we have parties attending
call.
remotely, we do need to do a roll call.
Sorry, Allison, I got ahead of you.
Town of Apple Valley.
That's okay. That's why I'm here.
Yes.
City of Lancaster,
Yes.
City of Palmdale,
Yes.
City of San Jacinto,
Yes.
City of Pico Rivera,
Yes.
City of Pomona,
Chris Diggs, yes.
City of Rancho Mirage,
Yes.
and City of Santa Barbara.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Moving on, new business item number 8. Is there reports and updates from the Chief Executive, General Manager, and the General Counsel. So I'll call on I'll call on General Manager Kathy DeFalco.
Good afternoon, Chairman and board members. I actually do not have anything additional to update you on during this board meeting. I think we've had a pretty thorough updating on some relevant issues. So that's it, unless you have any questions. Okay, thank you.
Any updates from General Counsel Allison Burns?
I have no updates other than to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too. All right, and moving on to public comment. I ask if there's any members of the public wishing to speak on topics not listed on the agenda.
We have no requests.
And there are no requests to speak. No surprise. All right, any public comments from public locations? Or from, sorry, from remote locations? Nope, we're seeing none. All right, any board member questions? Any questions from the members? Nope. Any requests for future agenda items? There's an opportunity for you to get something on the agenda for our next quarterly meeting. Hearing none. All right, we're rolling along. So with that, I guess I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I'll motion to adjourn. I'll second.
All right, the meeting is, we're not gonna roll call adjournment. So we'll take that as a meeting is adjourned, and we adjourn to the next meeting dated February. Specific date to be
18th.
18th?
Yes.
We'll adjourn to February 18th. Thank you all.
Thank you.
No, the best work.